Ryan.
Hi, Savanah.
What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Unplanned. Thank you so much to our patrons. We couldn't do this without you. It really motivates us to keep making these videos and we really treasure your support. Stay tuned. We will be talking about our Pokemon card giveaway. I will do a special aura reading based off of your name, off of your social media platform, so whatever. And I will send you a Pokemon card. This will be one of the final weeks that we're doing this giveaway, so please take advantage of this free Pokemon card you could get.
And we want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors that we have who are also helping us out on the podcast. If you are interested in sponsoring us, please shoot us an email. Our email is in our descriptions.
So in this podcast episode today, we will be talking about the movie Unplanned, as mentioned, and it does tackle, I don't know if that's the correct word, but it talks about abortion, and we will be talking about abortion. It is an R-rated movie, so it does have some depictions of abortion, so we will be talking about those. So please, if you are at all uncomfortable, feel free to click away and come join us for another episode.
And also in our description with that, since we are talking about abortion, we are going to be leaving some links to different organizations like Planned Parenthood and some other really important organizations that you should check out and consider donating to.
Yes, Planned Parenthood, one of the most powerful worldwide organizations on the planet.
So first, like always, we'll give a little bit of background about this movie. So today we are talking about the movie Unplanned, which came out in 2019. It is an American drama that is an anti-abortion movie. It was written and directed by Carrie Solomon and Chuck Konzelman. It is based on a memoir by Abby Johnson, which came out in 2010 and is by the same name. The film stars Ashley Bratcher. It was theatrically released in the United States by the evangelical Christian production company called Pear. They've made other movies like God's Not Dead, and kind of funnily enough, they are based in Scottsdale, Arizona, not too far from where Ryan and I are. Not one of the more pleasant things to come out of here. Unplanned is, like Ryan mentioned, rated R. It was the first R-rated movie that this company ever made. They did dispute this, and they had other people on their behalf try to dispute this, but the MPAA maintained their hold on it being rated R, and the film's producers and others tried to still encourage people to go see it, kind of with the same feelings that maybe people had with seeing Passion of the Christ, that it was like still important for them to see it even though it was rated R.
I do find it ridiculous that it was rated R, just as like a quick insert there. There's pretty much no swearing, very little like graphic content shown, and even like some of the bloodier scenes where they do show abortion, quote unquote, happening. It is very tame overall. It's still kind of like horrific. It's kind of played up as painful, as hard, as gross, but it's still it's, to my eyes, it looked pretty tame.
Yeah, and I will add, like, the bloody scenes definitely did not look like real blood. Like, it was all kind of like almost like campy horror kind of blood, at least in my opinion. So additionally, when this movie came out, details of it were kind of hidden from the public during the production for fear of pro-abortion people like getting upset, I guess, or like speaking out and trying to like stop this movie from coming out. So they try to like keep it under wraps while they were making it. Some TV channels have refused to show the movie because they view it as being more so propaganda than a movie. And the accuracy of the film's portrayal of abortion and Planned Parenthood has been severely criticized, both by Planned Parenthood and doctors and just other outside people. And yeah, and shortly before the movie came out, Planned Parenthood did make a statement saying that the claims that this movie was making were false.
So to give you a brief synopsis, and Savanah, go ahead and interject at any time, we open up with narration. We love narration. We love it when we're told how to feel about the story before we watch it. Great film making all around. Everyone knows it's the most effective storytelling. She's like, I'll tell you right now, in this really bad Texan accent, that my story's not easy to hear. In fact, it might make y'all squirm. I don't know, something like that. But she's preferencing it, and it starts with this kind kind of bodily horror moment, I would say, where she's in an office and she gets called back to do oversee or help out with an ultrasound guided abortion. And so she's in there and they show this ultrasound of a fetus being sucked out. And it looks like the fetus is like squirming around, struggling. And the doctor says, "Beat me up, Scotty," as he's sucking out the baby. And our main protagonist, Abby, is just unable to handle this. So she leaves the room. She goes to cry in a closet. And then we're met with a flashback scene. We get flashback to how she could end up in this position because she wouldn't be sympathetic if we didn't understand how she got there. So we see how Planned Parenthood got her while she was young and in college and just so easy to take advantage of and say all these lies. And she's at a table and she starts her internship with Planned Parenthood. And I think it is funny that they were able to use Planned Parenthood. The name specifically is not just some kind of off-brand abortion clinic. So she takes her internship and she starts out as an escort, and they kind of start the movie, I would say, in my eyes, I thought it wasn't as pro-life typical. Like she gets there and she's really protective of who she's escorting. She talks to some of the Christians and the zealots who are anti-abortion, and she kind of yells at them, and we kind of walk her through her whole life, how she becomes the clinical director of this Planned Parenthood that she's working at until we meet back up to the current where the movie started, where she is taken into the back room. And you know what? She sees a whole bunch of other things throughout the movie where abortion didn't really bother her. She's taken back to where they see the fetuses and they have to reassemble them, and that doesn't disturb her at all. So we have like many kind of pinpoints throughout her life and career here. She marries, and her husband is anti-abortion, and her parents are like, "Are you sure you want to marry her even though you know where she works?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I feel like he didn't think that through. I don't know, Savanah, like, isn't the crux of pro-life that you're murdering people? And like, if you thought you were marrying a murderer, would you marry a murderer? I just don't understand how that works. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the whole... It's pretty uncompelling. There's like a court case at the end where Planned Parenthood accuses her of... Goodness gracious, what was it, Savanah?
They accused her of like stealing things from the office. The movie doesn't really elaborate exactly on what it was.
Abby ends up getting out. She teams up with 40 for Life, which is a anti-abortion I don't know, company? What is it? Nonprofit?
Nonprofit organization. Probably organization. I don't know if they're technically a nonprofit.
There was a lot of things that were unclear, and I know this wasn't the greatest synopsis in the world, but the film wasn't the greatest film in the world, just as a film. It didn't make too much sense to me.
The only thing that I would add, Ryan, that I think you left out is she does have 2 abortions herself also.
Oh, yes.
She does get married once before her husband that she is with now in real life. And she had an abortion after getting pregnant with that man. And then after she left him, she found out that she was pregnant again. And the first time she had a surgical procedure for an abortion, and the second time she had a chemical induced abortion. And the second one that she has, they also show in quite a bit of graphic detail of her writhing in pain in her bathroom, bleeding out essentially.
She's called and she's like, "You said that my uterus was going to be gently cleansed, not this. You didn't tell me anything." They probably didn't tell her about all the warnings and associations that could happen with any kind of medical procedure. But I digress. The next point, would be, why are we discussing this movie? Why are we discussing it, Savanah?
Well, I stumbled upon this movie on accident. I was actually looking for the trailer for the movie Unpregnant, which is a fun movie. I recommend that movie to anybody. It's on HBO Max. But anyways, I was looking for that trailer because I wanted to show Ryan to possibly talk about that movie on the podcast. But instead, I typed in Unplanned because I couldn't remember exactly what the movie was called, which led me to finding this trailer for this movie accidentally. I watched it, became upset upon watching it, and sent it to Ryan. It was just kind of look at how how ridiculous this movie is. And then Ryan was like, we should talk about it. So that's what kind of led us here. Also, kind of funnily enough, of like confusing the title. I also, like, every single time I wrote down like the name of this podcast, like in my like calendar and stuff, I kept writing down Unborn instead of Unplanned, because also there's a movie called The Unborn that is a horror movie that I saw, like, I don't even know, in junior high. Not the best horror movie, but still probably better than this movie.
I think I kind of knew about this movie just from LeftTube, which is left as YouTube, just so we can clear any biases out of the way if they weren't already clear. And I know a couple of YouTubers were kind of addressing it. And I think it's important to examine what, pro-life people think, so that we can accurately talk to them as if they're human beings, and try to come to some kind of common ground, putting it like as nicely as I can possibly put it. So that's why it's important to look at it. And I want to know what's out there. I want to know what people are seeing to make them have these opinions. And I gotta look at it to see and understand. Also, there's kind of that almost morbid curiosity where you just kind of want to know how bad it is. And I will say with this movie, my morbid curiosity, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse for me, like that like kind of itch to scratch. I could have gotten a lot more enraged, but I didn't actually with this film. But we can talk more about that later.
So also then to just kind of like put this in the context of today, I guess, just as far as like what the state of abortion is, or what the state of Planned Parenthood is, or anything like that, just so everybody's on the same page, which I think is important, because this movie, in my opinion, and I think factually, presents a lot of like misinformation and confusion maybe about what is real and what is not real. So I think let's just all start out on the same page of what is real. So just generally in 2021, we've already had more than 150 anti-abortion bills like introduced legislatively across all states in the United States. So it's very much still a very big issue right now, even though we have had a change in presidency. Things haven't really like slowed down with trying to combat abortion in any way, largely due to the state of our Supreme Court at this point being more conservative. Specifically, like where Ryan and I are here in Arizona, we do have some of the stricter rules on abortion here in the United States. Just in the past week, they were trying to institute a new bill that did pass with our Arizona Senate here that says that physicians that perform abortions due to genetic abnormalities can face, I believe, up to like 3 to 7 years in prison. And if you're a medical student, you can't even like practice doing that here, or else you again will face that type of criminal charges, which means that OBGYNs cannot become board certified in Arizona, which is a problem. Parents and grandparents can also like then sue providers for potentially performing abortions on women. And then just yesterday also here, the Senate has proposed doing a heartbeat bill, essentially to where as soon as a heartbeat can be detected, abortions cannot be performed. So that could be like as early as 6 weeks before women even know that they are pregnant. So all of those bills that have been introduced in the United States as heartbeat bills have been pushed down by the Supreme Court. So hopefully if that does pass here, the Supreme Court will get involved and block that from happening. Lots of problems right now in the field of abortion and abortion-related topics in the United States. So like I mentioned, we are going to be talking about some of the kind of like misconceptions or maybe misrepresentations that happened in this movie. Maybe to them, this is just how they chose to represent it, and it's not a misrepresentation. But the first one we're going to talk about is Planned Parenthood broadly, and then maybe some of the specific aspects within Planned Parenthood and how it was represented in this film. So one of the things that like really jumped out to me in the beginning and throughout the whole movie was how focused they were on making Planned Parenthood seem like this like corporation that was out for money, which was just kind of strange to me, because I feel like I've seen it presented in that way before, really. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
I agree. maybe not from the beginning, but kind of as we went along and we got to know the director at the time. What was her name?
Cheryl.
Oh, we got to know Cheryl. So I think Cheryl in Planned Parenthood, if we want to talk about kind of logical fallacies within the film, kind of stand as an ad hominem. Is that how you say that, Savanah? You know, the Latin term, like against man or whatever. They kind of stand in as like figures to beat up and concentrate on, and they, as if they themselves represent abortion. So Cheryl is kind of like this skinny, severe, strict woman who doesn't seem like she has any children. I don't know if she does. And she has this whole line where she's like, I hardly said anything when you got married, and I barely said a word when you decided to have children, even though I knew it would affect your work. So it's as if being anti-children would mean she's for killing children, which I thought was kind of humorous in a way, where they like kind of made her a child-hating person to begin with, to be in that position that she is as kind of this director, and later she gets a promotion and goes off to bigger and better places in Houston, where she runs an even larger facility and maybe works with headquarters. I'm not quite sure. They were kind of indescript about that. And she also has a whole comment about how abortion is like the fries in a fast food chain, where they try to break even on all the services they sell, maybe like birth control or like UTIs or what have you, and that abortions are how they make money. So abortions in the end are just all about the money. That's it.
And I thought it was pretty funny, like when she was doing that whole thing about, she was like, abortions are our fries and soda. America wants abortions. Which I laughed out loud at that part. And also beyond just like the like inner workings of like Abby working at Planned Parenthood, they also show her when she has to get an abortion herself. She's like, and I had to take out a credit card so I could pay the $500. And when she then becomes a counselor, she's also like basically like she describes herself as being a saleswoman and having to like sell people on abortions and being like, well, you've already spent this much money. You're going to have to pay even more money if you wait. So you might as well just do it today. Like those types of things.
It was very weird. And I thought they had a moment in the beginning too, where I think it's kind of insinuated maybe, or at least I kind of read this, where Abby had a nice house and kind of a nice car in the beginning. And I was like, wow, look at her making bank at Planned Parenthood. That's how you really make the living, to be able to afford all that. At least that's what I got from it. But I just thought it was like, I think it was kind of effective to criminalize and villainize Planned Parenthood and the director. The director was very unlikable, especially when she reprimanded Abby. I think it was a little bit ridiculous when they had a whole scene where they brought her back to headquarters, where she had to go there on short notice, and her supervisor was like, "You're being reprimanded for insubordination. You made a humiliation out of me," and da-da-da-da-da-da. I thought that sounded a little bit childish, but I think it could land as like tense, and it could anger a lot of people watching that in the right audience.
But also in that scene, something that I thought was kind of funny was like also the unprofessionalism of the HR person that they were meeting with in that meeting too, which I would also just like to talk more about how they portrayed like everybody working at Planned Parenthood is just being like wildly unprofessional. But like when they like HR called her in, and she had asked if they were going to be talking about this, and she was like, "No, we're talking about you, Abby." And then when they like get her in to sign the paper, she's like also being just like very like sassy to her essentially. And they really just like show all the doctors like this, like, and the nurses. Like Ryan said, like when the doctor is performing an abortion, he says, "Beam me up, Scotty," as he is sucking the fetus out of this woman, which when that happened also, I just like lost it with laughter. I was like, did that really just happen? And are they also like implying that Star Trek is evil? Like what is happening with this statement? And just like also like the callousness, like particularly in that scene, in that opening scene, it's like the doctor and the nurse in there are both very just like unfazed that this woman is also saying that she's like in pain and is uncomfortable, and the nurse is like, well, you chose to be here, and just like saying just kind of like offhanded comments. And I cannot imagine that ever happening, like really in any doctor's office, regardless of what procedure you're having done. They also kind of just show like a blasé attitude, I guess, amongst like the nurses and the escorts as well, and being like, everybody just kind of like makes jokes about everything. Like they have like the escort is showing Abby like on her first day, like the keep had to get into the building, and she's like, and you can remember it because the numbers spell baby. And when they are going, when one of the nurses is talking about how Abby has to go into the room where they keep like the pieces of tissue, she's like, oh, that's the parts of children room, or something like that. Like they just paint them all as making these like sadistic jokes all day long, basically.
I don't know about all day long, but a good portion of the day. I think that the most kind of the flip side of it, not talking about Planned Parenthood, but looking outside to the protesters, I thought it was the most interesting from my perspective is how they portrayed them. Because when I look at them, I see a bunch of blonde, blue-eyed, skinny people that don't know what they're talking about and have way too much time on their hands. So that's what I saw, and it kind of made me uncomfortable, like looking at them, and especially when Abby quit and she went over to their headquarters, Coalition for Life, that's what they're called in the film, and she went to their headquarters. They played this like welcoming, like, oh, at long last we're home kind of music, and they were just sitting there, and the bad acting as well, like they're just kind of dead in the eyes, like, yeah, that must have been horrible. Well, we're glad you're here, Abby. You really are making a difference. Oh my goodness. It felt almost like a horror film. I felt like something bad was going to happen. Like all along that they were robots this whole time, and that they were going to take Abby to the back and, I don't know, like skin her and like put her skin on a robot. Like that's what it felt like to me.
Specifically with Sean, the main guy who works for the Coalition for Life, he also just took on immediately like such a like patriarchal role, I guess, which I do want to talk about later, about some like the other messaging in this movie, which just kind of like really struck me. Like as soon as like Abby went there, he kind of was like, I'm taking control over the situation now. You don't get to decide what we're doing. Which was just kind of unsettling to me. What I really thought was interesting with the protesters was how they really try to like separate themselves from the other protesters that were there. So there was like the Coalition for Life people, which they presented as being like really peaceful. They just go out to the gates and like quietly pray, and maybe we'll talk to people if they like happen to be by the fence. But then there's another group of people some like feet away from them who have like big signs with pictures of like fetuses on them, screaming at people, saying that they're going to hell. And in the beginning, like Abby has a conversation with one of the Coalition for Life people, and they both agree that like, oh, they don't like those people, and these protesters, we're different than them. We're just here because we're trying to help people. We don't agree with what they're doing, but they never really necessarily say how they're different from them, apart from just being like, oh, we're calm and peaceful. Like they're not like, oh, we have different views. Like they don't say like, oh, they're saying you're going to hell and we don't think you're going to hell. Like there's never any like real understanding of what is so different between those two groups of people.
Yeah, I don't really understand these Christian values that are associated with the pro-life argument, because if you're saying that abortion is homicide, is murder, at what point are you redeemed and forgiven for murder? Especially when Christians are, a large part of them are like pro-prison, and I would assume anti-murderer, like real murder, like Ted Bundy murder, you know? So at what point is Ted Bundy forgiven just like Abby Johnson is forgiven, I guess is my question with that logic. And like I kind of mentioned earlier, like the parents are kind of okay with it complicitly. Like they say they disapprove, but they just kind of don't talk about it. And then same with the husband. He doesn't approve of her work, yet he still marries her. I just, I'm really confused on that logic.
Why don't we talk now, I guess, a little bit about Abby and specifically how she is represented and some things that I think should be known before maybe going too much into talking about her.
So I actually kind of want to tell you what I got from Abby, because I didn't really know anything about Abby other than I knew that she was a real person, and I don't want to. She's a real lady. I don't want to tear her down too much, but she just feels like I know her. She feels so realistic to me. That she was in college and looking for an opportunity to kind of differ herself and kind of have an opinion of hers that she can hold on to. So she decided to align herself with Planned Parenthood, even though everyone else in her family was against it. And that she was there for so long, never really like comfortable with abortion, but still holding on to that opinion that she kind of formed and thought was her own, but really wasn't. And it just kind of is shuffled through into a position of power, where she eventually becomes uncomfortable with her job for some kind of unknown reason. And we can kind of talk about that when we talk into the facts about Abby Johnson. But in the movie, it's just portrayed as she sees a guided ultrasound abortion. So she sees the actual physicality of it, and it makes her uncomfortable. And so she eventually just kind of breaks and goes away from her career. So she just feels so realistic to me as just someone who just wasn't super educated from the start and just kind of been put in with this life and didn't know how to get out of it.
I did kind of want to touch on something that you said like in the beginning, Ryan. It's about how like she is a real person. And I was really trying to like think about like coming to this podcast and how to just like discuss her, I guess, just like from an objective like perspective, I guess, because I think it's important to not just like destroy her or like tear her down, you know, because she is a real person. And I mean, she does like kind of become likable in the movie in a way. And I think so often it's like really easy for conversations about anybody that you don't like to then just like turn into something that is not productive and can even turn into something that's misogynistic in some way. And so I think I was really trying to like figure out how to think about her and talk about her in a way that was like productive, I guess, and just like not mean. Or not mean, like it's just like this is what it is. But then as we'll kind of get into later, there's some things that I learned about Abby later on that just made it like a little bit more difficult for me to be more kind to her. Because I mean, like you saw the same thing with like Hillary Clinton, like in that election, like people just becoming like their inner misogyny coming out, I guess, about her, and it becoming less about the actual issues that people were upset about her with. It just turned into like nonsense, and that I don't think is constructive in these types of conversations.
Do you feel like you know this not that we should categorize people as types of people. I mean, I do, just because my brain likes to categorize people as types of people. And I think, you know, you can categorize yourself as a Cancer, a Taurus, as a Christian, as blah, 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 blah. I don't think it's unheard of to categorize yourself. But do you feel like you know this kind of person? Like, does she feel familiar to you at all?
I would say very much so. Particularly with her whole kind of like trying to balance, like, well, in my gut, I'm saying that this one thing is wrong in this instance, like abortion or abortion at a certain time frame is wrong, but I'm still like trying to enact these other parts of my life that I think are good. And specifically in like activist circles, I've come across quite a few people who have similar feelings on that. Like, for instance, specifically with issues of abortion, like I used to in college, I was involved with my school's Amnesty International organization, and one of the topics that they addressed was like access to abortion, although the organization itself doesn't like outwardly call themselves a pro-choice organization, they just blanketly say like having access to abortion is a human right. Anyways, in my like senior year, I was like pushing to have that be one of our main campaigns that we focused on. And that actually became quite a bit of like a point of contention that led to some people leaving our college group, because while they said like, oh, well, I agree with like all these other important human rights issues, this one just crosses a line for me. And so I'm not going to participate anymore. There were some people who did stay, even though they did say like that particularly crossed the line for them, but they would be willing to like kind of try to like learn about it, I guess, to see if they could fit in. So that's like a very direct example of like people that I've seen like that. But I think just generally I have seen people like Abby in various different capacities.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like she's a very introspective person, and a lot of people aren't introspective. Like, it takes a while to, not that I'm saying that I'm perfect and I know everything and I know myself truly and completely, but I think a lot of people don't really examine that what is around them and how their family affected their upbringing and their core values, how they want to separate themselves, what that means to be associating themselves with other people. And I think a lot of people don't think about the consequences of their actions, like being a police officer, for example. Like, you might just want to be a police officer because it's cool, right? Like, you get a gun. Police officers in media are portrayed as like cool and helpful, but people who are police officers don't think about, or at least they didn't think about before, the like systemic racism and just brutality that comes along with the job. Kind of a clear example of that. So I don't think she thought of the full implications of being aligned with Planned Parenthood and fully aligning herself with those ideals.
They do 2 points. Like, in the beginning, she does say, like, when she's approached by Planned Parenthood, her first, like, statement is, oh, well, my family is pro-life, so I guess I'm pro-life too, which was kind of, like, insinuating that she hadn't actually really thought about it. And then the other thing that they, like, kept coming back to in the movie was, like, she would always say, oh, well, I'm working here because the goal for me is actually to reduce the amount of abortions that are happening by doing these other things. But that also just kind of made it seem like she still just like wasn't either accepting or just not fully thinking through what she really was doing there.
Which is fair. It seems like life just kind of sweeps you away and you're in a position before you know it, but it's still your job to be conscious of the choice that you're making and live up to it. Do I agree with what she did with her platform? Do I agree with this memoir that she wrote and put on the shelves? No. But do I think she is allowed to do it? 100%.
Something else with Abby that I kind of took away was like, I was trying to like put myself in her mindset, I guess, and what led to her like having this whole issue with ending up leaving Planned Parenthood. And to me, it just seemed like she had like a lot of internalized like guilt and shame probably around like her own abortions that she had had, and like this her own like guilt that she had put on herself for just working there in general. And it seemed like probably some type of mental gymnastics that she was like putting herself through by continuing to be there. And I can only imagine like that would be really hard to go through, even if I don't agree with her personal opinions on these things. Just having to have those feelings in the first place is really horrible. And from that point, I can like kind of understand maybe like what led to her leaving as it's presented in the film.
Savanah, what I don't understand is how she could go and make a movie like this or a memoir like this and whatever. What I couldn't put myself in her shoe is how she could have the 2 abortions and have the choice at the time and make those choices and be older and not understand why she made those choices when she was younger, and giving other women the opportunity to make those choices if they need to or if they feel that they want to. I'm not, like, my mind is not wrapping my head around that. I think that's one thing where me and Abby, I cannot put myself in her shoes.
I think something else kind of similar to that really like bothered me with the movie was that it just like, it doesn't ever show somebody having like a good experience after having an abortion. Like, every time somebody has an abortion, they're portrayed as being like in this awful state afterwards and distraught or sad. But in reality, it seems almost as though Abby did have a good experience after having her own abortions. I mean, in a way. I mean, if you were to ask her, she would say probably it was bad, and that was like her learning experience that she had to get from God to be the person who she is today. But if you just look at it from an outsider without knowing that, you could see like, oh, she was able to get these abortions and have a life that she wanted, like that she really wanted at that time, and pursue a career that she really wanted to pursue at that time. So in a sense, she was having like a positive outcome, but that was like never what was presented for like anybody else.
I don't think we ever really followed up on any of the people who had abortions in the film other than Abby. Am I wrong?
I don't believe you do see any other follow-up. You just see the women afterwards, like in their like waiting room, all like shown almost kind of like a horror movie, I would say, where they're like all like slumped over, or at one point like bleeding out and like in a poor state, essentially.
If we want to go back to logical fallacies, I found the concentration on the bodily horror and risks of abortion to be a straw man argument. So that's just kind of propping up an argument that's not really what we're talking about, and just saying like, this is it, like we're focusing on this, but this is like a consequence of abortion. So if abortions are bad for women and their health, abortions are bad. And there's health complications with any kind of medical procedure that there is. Every side can agree on that. Nobody wants medical complications. Everyone wants to be healthy, and I think everyone can agree that multiple abortions can jeopardize your fertility.
I do know that it's true that statistically you're more likely to have complications from going through a full-term pregnancy than you are with a single abortion.
Apparently, multiple surgical abortions can infect your reproductive organs. I mean, just like I would imagine any kind of surgical procedure would. But people are having abortions just to have abortions, like the movie I feel like kind of suggests at some points. Nobody wants to feel uncomfy. No one wants to have a 3-day procedure where they're almost giving pseudo birth. Nobody wants that. And the movie sometimes portrays it like these women are having abortions just for kicks.
Or that they like haven't fully thought it through. Or like they also never show anyone who's just like confident in their decision either. Like most of the people that Abby is seen like counseling are like, they're like, oh, well, I'm kind of unsure. I'm wondering about this thing. Like, I don't know. Like, which is also just not true. Some people might just walk in and be like, yep, this is what I want to do, and I'm comfortable with that choice.
I think they just kind of assume that there is a moral dilemma, that everyone has to make this moral decision, when in fact it's not a moral dilemma for everybody.
They also always present kind of the idea that like only women in crisis have abortions as well. Like I think they specifically use that language a few times in the movie, which is also just not true. Lots of women have abortions for many different reasons, regardless of whether or not they are in crisis.
And if we kind of want to leapfrog from there, I did text Hope to whatever the number they said at the end if I'm a woman in crisis or wanting someone to leave, and I clicked on the thingy and it brought me to this Unplanned org cares, but really it was sponsored by or linked to My Faith Votes. And I am horrifically uninformed of what My Faith Votes is, but I did click on it, and it's pretty much just news from a Christian perspective kind of website. But I did call the number for, it was like Optium Healthcare. So I called, and I said that I saw the movie Unplanned about a week ago, and I've been really thinking about it, and I was thinking and considering abortion, but what is my pregnancy options? And honestly, they weren't really helpful, I would say. They just recommended me a clinic nearby called Choices Pregnancy. They recommended me to a clinic called Choices Pregnancy, and they did not refer abortions or perform abortions there, meaning that they couldn't refer me to a specialist for an abortion when I pressed a little bit more. But the person on the phone didn't try to skew me either way, I would say. She just recommended me this place that was probably tried to convince you, I would say, if I were to go there and follow through with this whole investigation, to not get an abortion, I would imagine. But overall, I would say that it was not unhelpful.
But you didn't get any information.
I didn't,
but the place to go.
The clinic is free. It's Choices Pregnancy.
Well, it's probably a pregnancy resource center, which they do show kind of in the movie, which is basically, it seems like what 40 Days for Life is kind of like their office, which is a whole issue that I don't think we really need to get into right now. But if you are interested in learning more about specifically pregnancy resource centers, there's a really good episode of Last Week Tonight that came out like a couple years ago that kind of does a deep dive into those and the ethics behind them.
I really wanted to make my boyfriend call and be like, my girlfriend is thinking of getting an abortion and I don't want her to. What should I say? I really wanted that conversation to happen. Like, I wanted to hear the other person's opinions. But just the way the conversation was naturally unfolding, she was just like, just go to this clinic. You need to know and get an ultrasound and da-da-da-da-da, like, before you make any choices. So that's what they said.
I considered calling them / texting them, but I didn't because, I don't know, I just felt a little unfair, I guess, of doing that. Not that I would do anything like mean, but like I have done like text phone baking for Gnarled Pro-Choice America before, and I've had some people say some pretty not nice things to me just to like troll me. And so I was like, I don't really want to troll anybody. Not that I think you were trolling, right? It sounds like you were doing just some investigation. But I just felt like, I don't want to like take up someone's time.
I feel like I really wanted to have like some kind of really elaborate backstory and go in there with some really hard-hitting ethical questions. But just like you, I've worked in the phone industry, customer service industry, and I didn't want to waste that person's time too much. So I opted for the much more boring vanilla route.
So kind of the elephant in the room that I think needs to be addressed is just some facts about Abby Johnson and the reputability of this movie and her book. So first, I would just like it to be known, I did do a deep dive in some of Abby's YouTube videos. She is a YouTuber now. And a direct quote from Abby is, "The truth is not subjective. The truth does not change." So just putting that out there before we get into this. As Ryan said, there are some like court proceedings that are very quickly gone through at the end of the movie. From what I've seen on Wikipedia, this is the information that I got about what actually happened. So Planned Parenthood noted that Abby Johnson was put on a performance improvement plan, which they did show in the movie. And they did this because she was seen removing items from the clinic that she worked at, and that supposedly she was taking confidential files and was taking like the home addresses and phone numbers from people like at the clinic to give to the Coalition for Life, and that was why she was put on a performance leave. From there, it seems like kind of like leading up to all of this, Abby Johnson in her personal life was like on the brink of bankruptcy. And that kind of more so led to her talking to the people from the Coalition of Life. And they were like, we could help you get a job if you leave. And kind of like insinuating that if she took these documents to like give to them, they would help her get a job and get out of debt, essentially. And this has been corroborated by like multiple people that she worked with, that she's supposedly told that this was happening and this was why she was planning to leave, not actually that she was having a whole moral dilemma. It was more so about her own personal finances. Also, just specifically in her like whole account that she has said about witnessing this abortion, she very specifically has said that it was a 13-week abortion and a African-American woman who was having the abortion done. And as per Planned Parenthood's records that they are required to have and to release, they did not have anybody that day who was 13 weeks pregnant who was having an abortion, let alone an African-American woman. There was an African-American woman who did have a 6-week abortion. So nobody was there at the 13-week mark, which would have meant that what Abby was seeing on the ultrasound would not be at all what was seen in the movie, but also probably just like she wouldn't actually even see like a full baby at that point. It would just be kind of like a speck on the monitor, which I did do some research on what 13-week-old fetuses look like in the womb. Based off of what I could see on the internet, it does kind of look like what it looks like in the movie, although like the like squirming and things like that, I don't think that you would see in real life. I'm not a doctor, but what I saw in there did not look medically accurate. And I watch a lot of YouTube doctors, specifically gynecologists, so it didn't seem accurate to me. So all of that is to say, it seems like maybe what is presented in this movie and in Abby Johnson's book isn't really 100% true. I mean, it's kind of hard to verify, but there's been investigations done by like outside journalists into the situation, and that's where it seems like this information is pulled from that is on Wikipedia. And Abby Johnson specifically has been kind of compared to Norma McCorvey, who was the Jane Roe in Roe v. Wade, who after Roe v. Wade like came out as being against abortion and like kind of it seemed like maybe regretting her choice to go through all of that, but has since then recanted that and said that she was actually paid by pro-life organizations to have that stance. So she's kind of flip-flopped back and forth, and so Abby Johnson has been compared to her in that as well. And now Abby Johnson is kind of one of the icons within the conservative right here in the United States. She did speak at the RNC in 2020, and I believe at CPAC just recently. So that's Abby Johnson in real life, which I feel like in the movie you don't get any of that, let alone like as I've gone into Abby's social media and her YouTube, I mean, it's kind of hard to say what she was like prior to getting this like fame, quote unquote. But in the movie they make her seem just kind of like this like kind of like a quiet person, like not out like looking for a lot of like recognition or anything like that. But that is not really the personality that Abby has in her YouTube videos or other online content. She very much, at least now, presents herself as being like wanting to be in the spotlight.
I would believe that. And nothing wrong with that. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. But yeah, nothing against that whatsoever. I do just quickly want to talk about this piece as a piece of propaganda and whether we think that we would consider it a piece of propaganda, and if it is it effective? Propaganda is defined by dictionary.com as information, especially of a bias or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Abortion, I think, unfortunately, is political. And at the end of the day, the argument is life begins at conception. So if you abort, it is considered murder. You are murdering an innocent life, and murder is wrong. So that's kind of the argument that we can deduce from that. It is an inductive argument, meaning that the conclusion is really based off of how solid the argument is to begin with. And since there is no proof that souls exist, and there is no proof that life begins at conception necessarily, that would deem the argument to be false. And I don't think this movie really argues that, to be honest with you. I did not really get so much of a pro-life argument and stance. I got more just abortion is horrendous and unsafe and a corporation, and people should keep their children because of the joy that they bring. I didn't really get that abortion is murder. I feel like they really did not beat that into my brain. And I think that's the central point of the pro-life stance. I mean, it's in the name, pro-life, you're for life, but they didn't really talk about the like the death part of pro-life.
They didn't really. There was one scene where Abby was talking to Sean while she was still working there, where she was saying how like there's always been people like me who are standing up for women. Just think about civil rights or the Holocaust or slavery. There's always been people standing up for other people. And then Sean was like, but what you're doing to the fetuses is what happened in the Holocaust, and that's what happened in slavery. So Sean basically is making the argument that like these fetuses are being murdered, I guess, in a way that is equivalent to the Holocaust or something else, which, just as an aside, that's really awful. It really bothers me when people say things like that. I mean, in general, but like as a member of the vegan community, I see a lot of people make like comparisons between veganism and like the killing of animals and the Holocaust, and I would just like that to be known that that is not okay to make comparisons to the Holocaust or to slavery with things like that, and is diminishing anyways. But there is like that one little part of the movie, but there's not very many other parts that also go into the actual pro-life argument. Maybe they do that on purpose because maybe these other things like Planned Parenthood being a corporation or the medical complications could be the things that maybe that's how they can get new members into their group.
Yeah, it didn't, to me, feel like anti-abortion propaganda. It felt like anti-Planned Parenthood propaganda, which I feel like are two different things.
I mean, it definitely was specifically more focused on Planned Parenthood. I mean, I don't know anybody who is just one or the other. Well, maybe that's not true, because there are some people who specifically like got upset when they found out maybe like what was happening with the fetuses or tissue at Planned Parenthood a few years ago. So maybe there are some people who were specifically upset with Planned Parenthood because of that, but are not necessarily pro-life. But other than that, I don't really know anybody who is like different. Maybe there are some pro-life like women who do go to Planned Parenthood just because that's where it is easy for them to go to the doctor. I don't know.
Yeah, or if they don't have insurance. I mean, there's a lot of Planned Parenthoods that don't even provide abortion services.
Something that I thought about while watching this movie and trying to think about it as a form of propaganda is like, how different is this from other movies as being propaganda? Like, I would argue most movies are probably propaganda, which we've kind of talked about before in other podcasts. I think that like this was very specifically in like leaning a very specific way of what the propaganda was, whereas some like maybe more mainstream movies are not as like blatantly like this. But also then I was like, well, is it just that other movies that maybe people would say are liberal propaganda, I just am more aligned with those values, so I don't see them as much as being propaganda? Or is it just that it's not propaganda, that's just the truth of reality, and it's no longer like an issue of an opinion, that just is what it is?
I honestly can't think of any examples of what people cite as liberal propaganda, besides maybe like WAP. I don't know.
I mean, I think like literally anything. I mean, the thing right now that I feel like has been really on my mind is like Lil Nas X's Call Me By Your Name that just came out this week, which Abby Johnson has tweeted about, which we can share here because she was upset about Lil Nas X and his music video. And I've seen many people talking about how they feel like that is propaganda against Christians.
But there's no misleading information in there. There's no misleading information, so that would not be considered propaganda.
Maybe like the movie Milk. Did you ever see Milk, Ryan, about Harvey Milk?
No, I never did. No.
Well, it's a movie about Harvey Milk that is like kind of a similar model to this, where it's like biographical about someone. And I could see maybe somebody being like, well, they're not saying all of the facts, they're just portraying him in this way to promote the gay agenda or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's many examples. I know that the right likes to make a lot of things seem like it's propaganda, just like the left does. I don't know.
Which I would also just like to add in there that another issue with that is just like also anti-Semitic view that the right tends to have against liberal media. Kind of back to the Unpregnant movie that I was trying to find. The comments on the trailer on that movie on YouTube, not a pleasant place to be. Let me just say that. Very anti-Semitic comments for that trailer, and also comments about Unplanned. Also, people being upset. They're like, they specifically named this movie Unpregnant because of the movie Unplanned, and they're just more trying to come after us. And just nonsense.
Okay, so since we looked at the pro-life argument, we can now look at the pro-choice argument just a little bit, just so we can have unbiased on our podcast, you know, the most unbiased podcast around town. Come check us out. PPP.
PPP is only 1 P away from Planned Parenthood.
You're right. PPP. Anyways, it's also kind of an inductive argument, meaning that the conclusion is only as strong as the premise. So the conclusion kind of for pro-choice is free will is good. I think everyone most of the time can agree that free will is good, except for certain cases like murder, right? Or, I don't know, rape, incest, all the kind of socially accepted bad things. And people should be allowed to express their free will if it is safe for humankind. So that is the kind of conclusion. So abortions are good and necessary because it promotes free will. I would say it's kind of the crux of the pro-choice argument. Would you agree, Savanah?
Yeah. I think so. I personally don't think I've ever necessarily seen it that way. Well, I guess I have seen it that way. Because I think I've just always viewed it as like, this is an inalienable right to have, I guess. Which is essentially kind of the same as free will.
Yeah. I would say that they're pretty similar, if not the same.
Yeah.
That rights equal free will, free right, and a free choice to do with your body. So if you kind of see the arguments don't exactly line up with pro-life versus pro-choice, because it's not pro-life versus pro-death. And that's what I've always kind of found fascinating to examine. Because especially with Abby, who is someone who is now pro-life, had the opportunity and did make that opportunity and that choice to get an abortion. So I think this Unplanned movie is kind of the epitome of that pitfall with the pro-life argument, is that so many conservatives do believe in choice and free will and don't take my guns away, that they just riddle holes in their own argument with pro-life.
Yeah, it really doesn't make any sense to me, and it's something that has gotten me very upset to think about on multiple occasions, just that level of hypocrisy that is there. And I think it kind of like, it's one thing if it's just like your political views. I think specifically with abortion is that it is like more tied into people's faith and their political leanings versus maybe something like guns. Like, I don't believe there's any mention of guns in the Bible. There's also not any, I believe, any direct like referencing to abortion in the Bible necessarily either. But also I think there's kind of like some maybe different reasonings depending on which denomination you fall into with Christianity or other religions. I know other religions are also not okay with abortion, or like specifically like with Catholics. Like, Catholics are also against the death penalty in addition to being against abortion, which to me is just always kind of also been confusing with like some of the other things that they align themselves with as well. Like how they can hold all these things together at once and not have it make sense, I guess. Or like a good example I would feel like is in this movie, very specifically, like time and time again, they really come to this idea of like women having equal rights and yet not being able to do certain things. Like specifically, they like have like really like hammer in, I feel like, the dynamic of the family and having like the man really be in charge of the family in a way. Although like her husband, Abby's husband, is never portrayed as like outwardly being like, you have to leave your job. He was more so just seen like, I know more than you and I'm praying for you because I know one day you're going to do the right thing, kind of. Or like I mentioned, Sean, he immediately became like very domineering and like controlling of the situation for Abby, and just kind of like some of the other imagery of like her daughter playing with baby dolls and things like that. And it just, I don't know, it just, to me, it very much came off as that. And like even when Abby was first introduced to Planned Parenthood, they like were talking about how like all women need equal rights, and Abby was like, yeah, women do need equal rights, but then goes to kind of walk that back in a way. I don't know, it really drives me crazy when specifically like a lot of like fundamentalist Christians like make this argument that women can have, like, women should have equal rights, but women and men have different roles. So as long as they're not infringing on each other's roles, it's still equal rights. It's like a separate but equal argument, basically, which we all know is just ridiculous. And I felt that very much put on here. And in addition to that, in real life, Abby Johnson has said once that she thinks that maybe we shouldn't all be allowed to vote, that maybe just each household should get one vote. And then if the husband and the wife, they can't choose amongst themselves who to vote for, then the man should just decide, because in a godly household, the husband is in charge. So, I don't know. That was maybe like kind of off the deep end of a rant about my feelings of Christians and gender equality, but I feel like there was some like connection there to the specific fallacy and the pro-life versus pro-choice, like life versus choice, and like equal rights but separate rights in a way.
I think that about wraps up our conversation about Unplanned.
All right, well, thank you everybody for hanging out with us today. As promised, here are the directions for our Pokemon card giveaway. So all you have to do to get one of these super special Pokemon cards is review our podcast on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, screenshot those 3 things, and then DM us your screenshots on Instagram along with your mailing address. Or alternatively, if you are not a Instagram person, you can also just do the Apple Podcasts and YouTube portion and email us your screenshots with your mailing address. Our email is in our description down below. And you too can have your own very special Pokemon card from Ryan's collection.
If you would like to support us, please check out our Patreon down below. We have a couple benefits that you can check out. I really appreciate you tuning in and being here. If you'd like us to discuss more Pure Flix stuff, which there is a subscription service for, there is. Let us know. We can make a special out of it. And we appreciate you again. Thank you. Bye. Savanah, did you know that there's no such thing as unplanned?
Did they say that in the movie? I don't remember.
That's the ending song. It's like, every kid deserves a life. Every God has a plan. So there's no such thing as unplanned.
I did see in the YouTube comments of the trailer that somebody said that that's their new favorite song.